Good morning, everyone. My name is Claire Escamilla. I'm with the Texas Water Resources Institute. I think I'll go ahead and start doing some of these introductions while a few of the remaining folks start joining in. I appreciate y'all joining us this Monday morning. Um, and I'm looking forward to having a good discussion with y'all and talking a little bit more about some of these riparian and stream ecosystems. I do have just some quick housekeeping that I want to go through before we really delve into some of the presentations for today. So we are recording this session and we will make it available to all of the participants following the event. So if you've signed up to take the course, if you need to leave a little early or you're having poor internet connection or anything, we'll make sure that we're recording this and getting sent to y'all so you can hear the discussion that takes place. If y'all could please try your best to stay muted during the presentations and while an instructor is answering questions, that would be appreciated. If there's something that's being said and you want to quickly get your question out, you can write that through the chat function and we'll make sure to address that at the end of the presentation. And once we open it up to discussion, we're going to try allowing people to unmute themselves, but if it seems like there's a lot of feedback or people talking over people, then we might just resort to just using the chat function. So we'll give that a try later in the morning. We're also asking if people can keep their video off. We know that some folks have some bandwidth issues or might have not as strong of a connection. So just to make sure that everyone can see good quality of the presentations, we're trying to kind of reduce some of that. And typically when we host these programs in person, we really like to get a feel for who's joining us, if they're traveling from other areas, kind of a little bit of their background. That's a little bit harder to do in this online format. So we've created a brief poll. So I'm gonna launch that right now. If y'all don't mind just quickly filling out just a little background about yourself, kind of your affiliation, your reason for taking this program, and if you're in the Attoyac Bayou Watershed or some other county, that'd be appreciated. I'm hoping it's all right. It looks like here, I'll quickly share it so y'all kind of have an idea of who we have here with us. Looks like we've got several agency professionals, majority of folks taking the program for an interest in natural resources, as well as educational units and some landowners. And then it looks like the majority of folks are a little bit outside of the Attoyac Bayou Watershed, but with a few inside the watershed. Okay. If you still see the poll on your screen, you may need to X out or click it off so you have the actual PowerPoint being seen. So just a general, this is our outline for today. So after these welcome and those brief introductions, we're gonna turn it over to Emily and Carla, who are gonna talk to you a little bit more about the Attoyac Bayou Watershed and kind of what's going on in that area. And then we're gonna open it up for discussions and questions about that online riparian course. Ricky Thompson, who's the local county AgriLife extension agent for Nacogdoches County, was planning to be here, but was pulled away for another meeting. So he sends his apologies for missing it, but he wanted me to share his contact information. So I have that here on the right of the screen. So this is their location is at the courthouse in Nacogdoches. You can see their online website up above. And then his actual contact information, his email. He's the Ag and Natural Resources County Extension Agent, and he's available to answer any local questions, as well as they've got a lot of great opportunities going on within that county. One that's coming up that he wanted me to share was that they are going to be having a 5-hour ag recertification program on November 4th. So they're going to be offering 5 CEUs. It looks like 1 integrated pest management, 1 for laws and regulations, and 3 for general. It'll be $40, and it's going to be at the Nacogdoches Expo Center. He says that it's a large facility, so they're going to be able to space people out to allow for that social distancing, and that masks will be required if you're planning to attend this in-person event. So if you're in the area and you're interested in getting some of those CEUs, you can RSVP to Ricky himself, or you can call the office and do the payment and get registered for that event. So with that, that's kind of all I have for the intro. So I'm gonna stop sharing, and then if Emily and Carla, y'all wanna share with us a little bit about the Attoyac Bayou?
Yes, let me share my screen. Make sure that I share the right presentation. Let's see here. Okay. So good morning. Like Claire said, my name is Emily. I'm Emily Monroe. I'm a program specialist at the Texas Water Resources Institute, which is part of the Texas A&M AgriLife Research and Extension Service agencies. And this morning I'm going to give you some Attoyac Bayou Watershed project updates. But first, let me just give you a little bit of background on TWRI in case any of you are unfamiliar with us. I just like to give a little bit of context and let you know of other projects that we do in case anyone is interested. So we were established back in 1964 as part of the Water Resources Research Act. And so while we do fall under the state as part of the AgriLife agency, we're also a part of the National Institutes for Water Resources, of which there are 54 institutes and centers. So there's one in every state and territory of the United States. TWRI's focus areas are listed here, and our watershed protection plans, which we implement several of those across the state, they address all of these focus areas, but we also have projects that are related to, for example, transboundary aquifers, where we're working with the border states and to ensure protection of our groundwater resources, as well as we have projects that develop education programs like Healthy Lawns and Healthy Waters, or the Texas Well Owner Network, which many of you have probably heard of, as well as today's program, our Landowner Riparian Education program that you're attending or you've been watching the videos for the last couple of weeks. We also do provide several free publications that you can subscribe to. I will leave the link in our chat box here in case you're interested in subscribing after I'm finished. We co-publish a research journal called the Texas Water Journal, as well as an excellent magazine called Texas H2O, and 2 newsletters, Conservation Matters and Texas Plus Water. Conservation Matters is our main one, and it's a monthly emailed newsletter. And these publications, they address a variety of water issues that we face in Texas, and highlight the work that's being done by people from all over the state. And it's not just TWRI's work or Texas A&M's work. Also, our communications team is it's pretty active on social media. So if you do the Facebooking or the Twitter or any of those, please consider following us, because we do share a lot of educational information as well as events like this one that are happening throughout the state. So whether you're from East Texas or any other part, you can get information about other programs that we are doing throughout Texas. So like I said, you can subscribe to any of these on the on the TWRI website, and I'll put all that website information and any of the contacts that I mentioned throughout this presentation in the chat box as soon as I'm done. Okay, so back to Attoyac. So when watersheds are listed as impaired on the Texas is a report from TCEQ. The state has to then develop a plan that will reverse that impairment and satisfy the EPA's requirements for a plan. Watershed protection plans cover what residents are doing or are willing to do to protect or restore water bodies in their area voluntarily. So the Attoyac Bayou Watershed Partnership was developed back in 2009. And then that group began working on developing the Watershed Protection Plan, or WPP is what I'll say throughout my little talk here. And that WPP was accepted by the EPA in 2015. It's a great document, and it covers a ton of information, including general watershed education that isn't just specific to the Attoyac Bayou Watershed, but also information and a lot of background about the Attoyac Bayou Watershed itself, as well as potential sources of funding and other resources that residents said they wanted to use to address the water quality issues in the area. And so since being accepted in 2015, TWRI and our project partners listed here, we've implemented several different kinds of projects. The main project partners are listed here, the Angelina and Neches River Authority, Stephen F. Austin State University, and Piney Woods RCND. But those are just project partners that we have contracts with and that sort of thing, but we work closely with all sorts of groups, Soil and Water Conservation District, NRCS, county extension offices, Forestry Service, local residents, of course, and other groups in the area. This is definitely not in the list by any means. You can read the entire WPP for yourself if you would like at the Attoyac Bayou Watershed website, which is this attoyac.tamu.edu. So our main project in the watershed is the WPP Implementation, Facilitation, and Water Quality Monitoring Project. It's funded by the Clean Water Act Section 319 Age Grant through, and we get the funding for this through the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board. Our main goals are to take what the Attoyac Bayou Watershed Partnership put together in that original WPP and bring those activities and resources to the watershed. So the main management measures that we're addressing in the WPP to address water quality concerns include repairing and replacing OSSFs, that's on-site sewage facilities or septic system, just depends on what word you want to use. Developing water quality management plans and feral hog management and water quality monitoring. And we'll go into detail on each of those items. Carla Etheridge from the Angelina Neches River Authority, ANRA, is the watershed coordinator in the Attoyac Bayou. We work closely together to implement this and other projects in the area. And she will be talking a little bit more about water quality and the water quality trends after I'm finished. So one of those main ways that we get the word out about our WPP is through education and outreach. And the items that are listed here are kind of the official ways that we've done so under this project. But we also have other projects and participate in other events in the area that aren't funded through this. But today's Landowner Riparian program is an example of our education and outreach efforts, as well as our annual newsletter that was just published in October or at the beginning of this month. And if you didn't get that, maybe you're not on the Attoyac email list, you can find a copy of our newsletter at our website. But when you go there, also be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any other emails that I send out. Let's see. Another way that landowners can address water quality is through water quality management plans or WQMPs. And those are plans that are developed between you, the landowner, and the Soil and Water Conservation District. And so there is some cost share opportunities that programs like these are able to provide to help with the cost of implementing these plans. Like, for example, the things that are listed here that we've done in Attoyac, like livestock pipelines, some watering facilities that are separate from maybe a water body that might run through your property, cross fencing and prescribed grazing. But they're all things that really help you manage your property better and benefit your property and your business, and at the same time help clean up the water. So if you're interested in learning more, Olivia Maxwell is the 319 technician. She's with the Nacogdoches SWCD, but she's the technician for the entire Attoyac Bayou Watershed. So if you're from the watershed, but any of those other counties other than Nacogdoches, you can still get with Olivia and start developing these plans. So also, feral hogs, managing feral hogs is another major concern that we all have, and folks in this area have, of course. And so we use programs like today's Riparian program to start to educate folks on how to mitigate the destruction that they can cause, because that's usually the main concern. When somebody asks us about feral hog management. They are, of course, a large contributor to E. coli in the Attoyac Bayou, but they're really only marginally manageable, and it's also really difficult to track how well we're doing with removal efforts. The best that we can do is implement some best management practices or BMPs that are listed here, and just get more educated about them in general. And I know that the experts that are with today's program will have a lot more information for you. And you've probably already watched the videos that they provided that's covering that topic. But also in order to track the efforts of this program, from the feral hog management to the septic system stuff and WQMPs, we do monthly water quality monitoring. So Dr. Matthew McBroom from SFA and his team of graduate students go out and collect water samples, and they take those to the lab at the River Authority to be analyzed for levels of E. coli and some nutrients and sediment information. This picture here, or this map here, is an outline of the Attoyac Bayou Watershed, and you can see where the Attoyac our WPP project monitors, as well as some additional monitoring sites taken care of through the Clean Rivers program. But like I mentioned earlier, Carla is going to go over water quality trends for the sites that we monitor. And so our other main project in the watershed is an OSSF, or Septic System Repair and Replacement project, funded by the EPA's Clean Water Act Section 319H grant through the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. With this project, we help repair and replace failing septic systems in the watershed, based both on proximity to the bayou and also income levels, or household income levels. And so we really focus on helping folks who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford a repair or a replacement, or even a system being installed on their property for the very first time, because honestly, this gets really pricey. And so the average price for a full septic system replacement or an initial installation is about $6,500, but I've had them cost up to $10,000. And just depending on the property and the type of system that needs to go in. But then the median income, or annual income level, of the folks that we helped on our last project was only $22,900. So we're talking more than 25%, 28% of our recipients' income on average, or that's just the median of the 24 that we've replaced, that would have to be set aside in order to replace their systems, which I'm sure you can imagine that that's not necessarily going to be a priority for folks. As long as the toilet is flushing and waste is being removed from the residents, then that $6,500 can go towards a lot of other necessities that household might need. The photo here is an example of one of the places that we installed a septic system at for the very first time on the last project. And you can see that pipe in the background coming out of the window, and then that standing water at the foreground of the picture where it was dumped. And so I could talk a long time about this project because I believe it makes an immediate impact on the health of the residents, obviously, as well as an impact on the water quality in the area. Failing septic systems were one of the issues identified in the Attoyac Bayou as being a big contributor to poor water quality. And so it's an important item to address. So the project that we just wrapped up back in February was the second iteration of the repair and replace projects that we've done. And so under that project alone, we replaced 24 systems. We also have been helping the county designated representatives, or DRs, with streamlining their data collection so that we can just have a better record of existing septic systems in the area. And if you're interested, you can find a final report for this project on our Attoyac Bayou website under publications. So we're currently on our third round of funding for this, and we have funding for about 15 replacements. So the number that we actually do just depends on the cost of those repairs or replacements. But so far, we have completed 5 of our 15. We just completed those. I believe the last one went in at the beginning of September. And so right now we're working on getting designs completed for the next 5 systems. So when those designs are finished, we will release a request for bids through the Texas A&M University system. Since TWRI falls under the system, we go through them for any bids that we release. And so installers, if you know any installers or you are a septic system installer in the area, you can email me to get on the list that I have. So when that bid comes out, we'll actually send an email directly from purchasing to you or to the installer directly. I mean, it is also posted publicly on the Texas A&M purchasing website, but honestly, this is probably a better way to just be sure you're on the list so that you can just get that email directly with the bid packet in it. And any Attoyac Bayou residents that want to be considered for this grant can contact myself or Ken and Jonelle from the Piney Woods RC&D to get an application. The map that you see here is a heat map of the locations where we replaced systems on that last project. So I believe this has all 24. There might be one missing that we did right at the very end of the project, but generally you can see the heat map. And honestly, we haven't had to do a whole lot of advertising for this project because if you can tell by the proximity to each other, the advertising really happens through word of mouth. So one guy gets one and then his neighbor sees us coming in and he's asking what's going on, and then he tells him, or one lady will tell her cousin or whatever. So we haven't done a whole lot of advertising. We've been, the Nacogdoches Daily Sentinel did a great article about us earlier this summer about the project, and we got a little bit of interest in that. And the news, one of the local news stations did an article last year on that, and so that really generates a lot of interest in the project. But still, we do this by first come, first serve. But if you get on the list, then you're in order. So if we either get more funding or we have another project, or maybe the 15 systems that we have right now don't cost as much as we anticipated, then we have a little bit of funding left over, and we will get as many repairs or replacements done under this project as we possibly can. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions. I'd be happy to.
Emily, there was one question that came in on the chat asking how you are tracking or measuring feral hog impact in the watershed protection plan.
That's a great question. It's really difficult to do. So this is I think the third round of this WPP project. And so when the last one ended back in October, before that, we tried to get a number of like feral hogs that have been removed by calling some meat processing folks in the area, and nobody really tracks what or how many feral hogs come through. You know, some other watersheds and other counties and areas might have like a program where you get paid for the number of, I don't know, ears or tails or whatever that you bring in, and they kind of keep track of those numbers. But in our watershed, we don't have any programs like that, and so there's no incentive to track, which is fine. It is what it is. But basically, the best that we can do is generate interest in people attending programs like this, in order to educate themselves on how they can mitigate the destruction or mitigate the growth of the feral hog population. Like, for example, having the deer exclusionary feeders installed on your property. So if you're interested in having the deer come, but you don't want the feral hog to get into your corn or whatever, there's different styles of exclusionary feeders that you can have. Or if you contact us to find maybe some traps or things like that. So we don't necessarily have a number that we know, well, we've removed this many or we've reduced the population by this percentage or anything like that. We don't have a good way of doing that. It's difficult to do. But yeah, so what we do is just try to educate people on how to mitigate the destruction and growth of the population. So hopefully that helps. Were there any other questions? If not, I want to introduce to you the Attoyac Bayou Watershed Coordinator. So I manage these projects along with our Attoyac Bayou Watershed Coordinator, Carla Etheridge. And Carla has been with the Angelina and Neches River Authority for the last year or so, or just over a year. And she is the Clean Rivers Program Coordinator for the River Authority, but now is embracing the additional role of the watershed coordinator for the Bayou. So we'll be working closely to implement the WPP and everything that I just covered. And now she's going to talk about water quality trends in the watershed. Take it away, Carla. Are you there, Carla? I can't hear you. You might be muted still.
Hi, everyone.
All right, good. We can hear you now.
Okay, good. I had unmuted my phone, but not the screen. So, hi, everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself after Emily's introduction. I am Carla Etheridge. I'm with Angelina Neches River Authority. I'm the Clean Rivers Program Manager here at ANRA. I am here today to give you some Attoyac Bayou Watershed water quality updates. So with that, we will get started. Okay, so I'm going to give you a brief overview of the timeline of the Attoyac Bayou WPP activities. So in 2000, monitoring started in the watershed. In 2004, Attoyac Bayou was listed on the 303D list for elevated bacteria. And I'll talk more about the 303D list and what that is in some later slides. But in 2009, the Attoyac Bayou Watershed Partnership formed and work began on the Attoyac Bayou WPP, which is the Watershed Protection Plan. Best management practices were formed along with that, or as a part of that Watershed Protection Plan, and they were developed for livestock, feral hogs, and OSSF, which are the three main categories of pollution there. In 2013, the first project for repairing and replacing failing OSSFs and monitoring was begun. In 2014, the Attoyac WPP was completed and approved. In 2017, a second project for both the OSSF repair and replacement as well as monitoring was begun. So in 2018, the 2016 integrated report was approved, and we had the most downstream assessment unit of Attoyac Bayou was actually removed from that 303D list, which is a list of impairments. But it was actually relisted in 2018 with the concern for those bacteria levels. In 2019, the third project, as Emily talked about, was begun for OSSFs and as well as the monitoring aspect of those projects. So on to monitoring. Monitoring is conducted at 10 sites, as you see on the map on the right side of your screen. 10 sites throughout the Attoyac Bayou Watershed. SFA does the monitoring for the WPP project, and their sites are the purple sites on the map. And then ANRA does, which is us, we do through our Clean Rivers program, the 5 additional sites in the watershed, and those are, you can see, are blue on your map. So these sites are monitored for conventional and field parameters. Conventional parameters include E. coli, ammonia, nitrate, nitrite, total phosphorus, your suspended solids, dissolved solids, chloride, and sulfates. Field parameters that we look at are water temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, conductivity, discharge, and Secchi depth, which is your transparency. So onto the integrated report, we take all of these, the data collected at all these monitoring sites, and it goes into a database. And every 2 years, TCEQ puts out a report called the Texas Integrated Report, and a part of that Texas Integrated Report is a 303D list, as I referred to earlier. That list is just a list of impaired stream segments and water bodies in the state of Texas. So streams that don't meet their criteria, their designated use, if they're above that standard, they get placed on this list. The list is a 7-year rolling window, so it's put out every 2 years, but they're looking at a 7-year period of record. So I've done a little illustration here. I took one of our sites and shown, so this is the 2014 integrated report. Bacteria here had a geomean of 178.5. The green box is just showing you your period of record. So if we move on to 2016, that period of record moves over 2 years, so you gain 2 years and lose 2 years at the back. In 2016 actually is when this site was delisted for E. coli, and it had a 125.93 geomean. The standard, as you can see right here, the red line of 126, that is the primary contact use standard for E. coli, so anything above that is considered above what it's supposed to be for its designated use. As you can see here, we gained another 2 years and lost 2 years at the back. So this would be 2018 Texas Integrated Report when the site was actually listed back with a concern for E. coli bacteria, and its geomean was just over the level at 126.24. So again, 126 was that standard there. And then for the purposes of the rest of this presentation, we'll be looking at the 2020 Texas Integrated Report. And this is just that rolling window, as you can see here. So we'll be looking at data from 2011 to 2018 for the purposes of this. But that's just how I was showing you the how that 7-year window moves as we're looking at the data and as TCEQ looks at the data for these. So the impairments and the concerns in Attoyac Bayou Watershed, we have E. coli bacteria impairments at site 10636. So assessments units right here, as you can see, 0612 is the Attoyac Bayou here. And all 3 assessment units are impaired for E. coli bacteria, according to the 2020 Texas Integrated Report. But we do have West Creek, which is located here, station 20845, which is a blue station on your map. It is listed as a concern with E. coli bacteria. So it's not quite over that level, but it's approaching that level. So bacteria, E. coli bacteria in streams is generally caused by non-point source pollution. So pollution sites that you can't necessarily nail down and locate. Those things, examples of those are runoff, ag runoff, wildlife, livestock, pet waste, which is mostly in urban areas. And then you have your faulty septic systems. Feral hogs are one of the largest contributors of E. coli in the Attoyac Bayou Watershed. And like Emily was saying, those are very hard to track. So I put together this graph. The red line is showing your standard. So that would be your primary contact 126 value for E. coli. That's the level that you're supposed to be under. So the different color bars are just the different integrated report years and how those years change. And as you can see on the right, this entire blue section is the section that is listed as impaired in the watershed. So now I'm going to go into site specifics of the 10 monitoring sites throughout the base or the watershed. Attoyac Bayou at SH21 has been monitored quarterly, and it's part of the Clean Rivers program. Additional biweekly and monthly monitoring is performed here as part of the WPP, but it has a geomean of 192, so it's just over that level. Attoyac Bayou at State Highway 7 has been monitored for CRP program since 2003, and additional monitoring has been included on it as well, and it has a bacterial geomean of 183. Attoyac Bayou at 59 has been monitored quarterly for the Clean Rivers program since 2000, along with additional monitoring, and it has a geomean of 221. For the Attoyac Bayou at Farm Market 138, it has been monitored since July of 2010 as part of the WPP project and some other subsequent projects. It has a geomean of 278. Terrapin Creek, FM95 has been monitored since July of 2010 as part of the WPP project, and it has a bacteria geomean of 219. Waffalo Creek at Farm Market 95 has been monitored since July of 2010 as part of the WPP project, and it has a bacteria geomean of 172. Nakanish Creek at Farm Market 95 has been monitored as part of the WPP since 2010. This is one of those SFA sites as well, and it has a bacteria geomean of 198. Big Iron Ore Creek at Farm Market 354 has been monitored as part of the WPP project and has a geomean of 365 for bacteria. And then we have West Creek Farm Market 2913. It has been monitored since 2010 as part of the WPP project, and it has a geomean of 177. And then this is one of the reservoirs, Nakanish Lake. It's been monitored quarterly for the Clean Rivers program since 2013, and it has a bacteria geomean of 2. It's not very common that the reservoirs have high E. coli levels, but since it is a site in the Attoyac watershed, we wanted to include it here. But it's obviously well below that 126 mark. I was going to add, I'm going to go back a couple slides to here. So even though this bacteria geomean is a 365 and the limit is 126, that 365 is not an outrageous number. As you can see, we get numbers up here almost to 2,500. So these numbers for these E. coli geomeans are not outrageous. They're definitely things that can be addressed and aren't just, you know, some crazy levels. They're definitely addressable. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. I don't think I've seen anything come in the chat box, so.
I'll give it a second if anyone wants to write anything in the chat box, but I want to thank Emily and Carla. I think one of the reasons why we love having local watershed updates with our Riparian program is because our goals are so closely aligned. You might have heard a lot from Emily's presentation about some of those management strategies in their watershed protection plan. And those are very similar to some of those best management strategies we discussed in that online Riparian course. So really improving water quality and having those healthy riparian areas kind of go hand in hand. And one of the big themes from our riparian course is looking at your stream system on a watershed scale. So that's why we think it's so important to look at that whole watershed. It looks like Josh sent the last bacterial source tracking report I could find was from 2014, but this is one way wild pigs and other impacts are tracked in the WPP. Josh, do you want to talk about this quickly, this link you found?
Sure. I hope everybody can hear me.
You're a little quiet. I don't.
So yeah, let me turn up my mic here. Okay, a little better, hopefully.
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, so one of the questions that came in was how do we track the feral hog impacts and other impacts and stuff like that? And one of the ways that we do that is through bacterial source tracking efforts, where essentially it's fecal typing, where they sample for different bacteria sources and that kind of stuff. And I heard it said that wild pigs were the leading contributor of bacteria, but according to what I found in 2014, apparently it's actually humans and domestic animals. Now things may have changed since then, but essentially the water is sampled for different bacteria sources. And I encourage you to check out that link. And that's one of the ways that we can quantify it. And in different watersheds, we have different impacts. And in a number of watersheds, wild pigs are in fact the leading contributor of bacteria. Fecal bacteria, but in this case, according to at least 2014, that is not the case. And I'm going to try to bring up that graph here so that I can, there's a couple really good graphs in that report. And okay, so I got it up here now.
Let me quickly make you a co-host, Josh, so you can share your screen. Let me find you on this list. Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
Let's do it. Screen one, share. Okay, it looks like you guys can see that now, and I hope you can, but I'll scroll up here. So this is one of the charts here on the different sources, right, that was achieved through bacterial source tracking. And it looks like humans were 25%, domestic animals came in at a whopping 34%. Wildlife came in at 41%, but there's two classifications for wildlife, and that is avian wildlife and non-avian wildlife. Now, feral hogs or wild pigs, whatever you want to call them, they fall into the category of non-avian wildlife, even though actually wild pigs are not wildlife at all. In Texas, they're classified as exotic livestock. But we can see here, at least in this particular watershed, that 25% could be attributed to wild pigs, whereas domestic animals, if you just add people and their pets, guys, we're looking at a huge contributory factor there that has nothing to do with wildlife of any kind, including wild pigs. But again, I don't know, what has changed since 2014. I couldn't find anything more recent, but I did want to point this out as one of the ways that we track these impacts. And there was another, here we go. There was another little chart here that we're looking at for PCR markers, and hogs came in there a little under 30%. General was, by and large, quite the largest number, but ruminants as well. So I just wanted to point that out. This particular report might be something that you guys might be interested in looking at, particularly for this watershed. And I hope that helps. It was just a quick thought that I wanted to post up there, guys.
Thanks, Josh. And I can make sure to attach that link to our follow-up email. And it looks like Emily also sent some of the BST in that watershed also, so I'll attach that link. Emily, is there anything you want to specifically say about that?
I thank you, Josh, for sharing the whole BST and for clarifying. Feral hogs are not the, sorry if we misspoke, it's not the main or only or concern or whatever for the contribution. It is an important factor and one, but it's a leading concern of the residents in the area. So when the WPP was being developed, it's one of the management measures, one of the main management measures that we have highlighted in the WPP. And it's also that BST report is summarized in the WPP. So that's the link that I sent. It's just a direct link to the document, and that's beginning on page 49. And it talks about feral hogs specifically. It also talks about our other contributors. Of course, humans are, a huge part of that, pets and everything. I mean, I never want to come to a meeting and share about any of the WPPs that I implement or any of the projects that I manage and say that if we could just get rid of feral hogs, our water quality would be perfect. Or if we could just get rid of cows or chickens or whatever it is, then things would be perfect. I hope I didn't give that impression about hogs or any of the others. It's not any one group by itself. It's just one of the main concerns that people have. And so WPPs are voluntary documents that are, or the WPPs are put together by volunteers, and they represent the concerns of those volunteers that put the document together. So there's a whole lot of information. It doesn't just cover hogs or anything like that. So, but I appreciate Josh finding the BST document itself. And we have not done a BST since then in the watershed.
Well, and I think that's a great start to kind of what we want our next part of this meeting to go, is to lead into discussion. So I think kind of that already starts us kind of discussing for the Attoyac Bayou, but we also want to bring in now kind of what we've covered in those online programs as well. And hopefully y'all have been through all of them, but maybe you've only been able to take a couple, and that's okay. I did have a question earlier, so I wanted to just make you all aware those videos are not going to disappear after today. So if you have started them, but you haven't finished them, you still will be able to sign on and finish that course and take it. And then you also are still going to be able to have access going in. So if you want to retake it or revisit it at another time, you'll be able to rewatch those videos. But I want to open it up now for any general questions about what you've just heard about the Attoyac Bayou Watershed or about our greater program in general. So just quickly, I want to kind of introduce some of the instructors that we have here and can help answer some of your questions. So I've already introduced myself, Clara Escamilla with the Texas Water Resources Institute. We also have with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, we have Ryan McGillicuddy, who's with us right now. And then I've also included Melissa Parker's email address, and she's the one who recorded the presentation, the module that you all watched online. We've got Ricky Lennox with the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, and he was the one who did the stream walk across Texas, as well as also the presentation on riparian vegetation and the importance of that vegetation. We have Mac Martin and Lori Hazel, both with the Texas A&M Forest Service. Mac Martin was the one who had the recording online, and Lori is kind of the head on Texas A&M Forest Service, who works and helped organize these riparian programs. So they're both online and happy to answer any questions, as well as Josh with the Texas A&M Natural Resource Institute. So you just heard him briefly before talking about wild pigs, and he had those online videos talking about the management of wild pigs. So if there's any questions to start off with right now, you can either unmute yourself or write it in the chat. And then if it looks like nothing's popping up, then I have a couple questions. Okay. So maybe while y'all are kind of formulating them, I was hoping let's maybe start with Ryan. So with Parks and Wildlife, y'all gave the presentation on how creeks function and kind of talking about that dynamic equilibrium and the 10 lessons on how streams want to function, the kind of the main mechanics of like what a stream wants to do and how it can recover. So I was wondering if you could kind of just maybe quickly touch on some of those main takeaways and messages from that, from y'all's presentation.
Sure, happy to. Happy to be here with all of you, and thanks for your participation today in this kind of new interesting learning environment that we're having here with COVID preventing us from being in person. So we still appreciate y'all staying engaged and taking some time out of your day to learn. So thank you for being here. Melissa Parker put that presentation together for y'all. She's had some one of her family members was unexpectedly hospitalized, so she's out today. But in essence, the presentation that you saw, the second module, had some main takeaways, and that was that streams are dynamic. That means they change. They do erode, they do move from side to side, but to a large extent, a stable stream, its movements are going to be predictable and measurable. And one of the main takeaways that we wanted you to internalize from that presentation was that a change in one variable will cause an adjustment in another. So streams respond to our land uses and sources of disturbance. But if we remove that source of disturbance, then very often, in many cases, just allowing the stream to do its thing and allowing vegetation to start repairing the stream, streams can, in many cases, begin the process of healing themselves. And, just going over those 10, lessons, it was very quickly that, that most don't want to be straight. Most streams don't want to be straight. That when a stream has access to a floodplain, it can dissipate energy and it can begin to trap and store sediment in those floodplains. Wood and rock help to slow those floodwaters down. Vegetation anchors the soil and also slows water down and traps sediment. And as we build those floodplains and allow the vegetation to do that work, it allows water to infiltrate into the banks of the river and store it in our groundwater table. And that basically is what we call that riparian sponge. So the riparian sponge will sustain the base flows in our creeks and rivers throughout drier times of the year as water moves out of those alluvial aquifers back towards the channel. And then we just saw some lessons about how streams can repair themselves through the process of becoming revegetated. And the great examples from Bear Creek of watching a stream repair itself after the sources of disturbances were removed. And what I do always like to reiterate about the Bear Creek example is that those are still working lands. Those are not lands that were taken out of production. They were lands that temporarily cattle were removed to allow the jump start in vegetation. But then it was put back into production in a way that accommodated the vegetative growth in a more rotational grazing scheme. And at the end of the day, the forage improved, and it was just about how to more thoughtfully manage those landscapes. So that's a quick summary of what we went over in that, and I'm happy to take any questions or pass it on to the next presenter to provide a summary, whatever you'd like to do, Claire. Thank you all.
Yeah, it looks like we had one question that came in. Is there a good source of best practices for road crossings on intermittent streams? What is the recommended offset for the riparian areas? We have heard 25 feet in Austin, but have 40 feet and 60 feet. And it looks like Mac has already started to answer that. And I know that was something that y'all talked about in your presentation. So Mac, you want to kind of touch on that?
while Mac's getting his audio situated, I'm happy to touch on the recommended offsets for riparian areas. If you're talking about how wide or far back from the stream a riparian area or grow zone should be established, it depends on the size of the stream, and it also depends on the uses. There's no one size fits all. Even a narrow buffer of 5 feet will start to provide some stabilizing function, as well as some water quality filtering. However, the wider you go, the more ecological and physical functions will begin to be provided. So the wider it goes, the more water quality functions you might be getting, the more wildlife habitat functions you might be getting, the more shading functions and things like that. So I typically advise people to start with about 25 feet, but really it's just a matter of how much you're comfortable establishing. If you want to start with 5 or 10, expand from there. The wider you go, the better. As far as stream crossings for intermittent streams, usually at grade is best, so that the stream doesn't even know that it's there. But I understand that, some people will have, problems with being able to access during high flow events, and they might want to span a little bit better. So there are, basically, if the stream doesn't know that the crossing is there, it's best because it can more easily transport water and sediment and accommodate passage of aquatic organisms. But there are some guidance out there. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a great several 100-page document on low water crossings that I can get to a link to that to Claire, and maybe she can provide to the class in a follow-up email, or I can look for it real quick here and maybe provide a link in the chat.
Hey, can you guys hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, I had my microphone going through the wrong speaker here. But I think you did a great job covering that. Our BMP guideline book that I put into the chat here with a link, it recommends at least 50 feet on intermittent and perennial streams. But otherwise, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head, Ryan.
Yeah, and certainly if you are in a forestry production, if silviculture is the management that you're in, you are going to want to follow as closely as possible those forestry management recommendations that are in that BMP book. But if you're just a residential or ranching or farming, you might address it a little bit differently, but certainly the wider the better.
This is Ricky Lennox. I'd like to add into that. Another way to look at this is you definitely want to have more than one row of trees against the bank of that creek, because if that one row falls in or dies, you have no protection beyond. So that buffer, the wider, the better. And if you make the buffer wide enough, and if you fence it off, you can even have a riparian pasture that could be occasionally grazed, not as part of a regular rotation, but every couple of years, you could graze that pasture. And I like to tell people, and this is kind of a rule of thumb, not as written down as these other guys have presented, and certainly I trust their information as well. But I usually tell people about 3 times the width of the water on each side. So if you've got a 10-foot wide water flow area, you'd need a minimum of 30 feet on either side of the creek. And as always, the wider, the better, because you're just building more riparian sponge, more effect for that creek to remain healthy, the wider that buffer can be. And I did throw a link in there. I think that might be the one Ryan was talking about on the the U.S. Forest Service has a low water crossing publication. It's over 300 pages. You may want to look at it online, but it's a very excellent publication on crossings, low water crossings. And I agree with Ryan, make that bridge or make that crossing invisible, and it'll last a lot longer.
Thank you, Ricky. That is, yes, that is the exact publication that I was referencing. I appreciate you finding that. And what Ricky said about, having more than one row of trees goes into the other presentation about, riparian vegetation. And the things that you want to look for to determine whether it is properly functioning, one of those is having multiple age classes, multiple species, and just having one row, more than likely, you're not going to have very many age classes in there. Where we most often see that is, a single row of mature trees. And if you lose those trees, there's nothing waiting there to replace them. So you're going to have a longer road to recovery if you don't have multiple age classes in your riparian area.
We also had a follow-up question come in with how much should we limit ash juniper and mesquite in the riparian area? And this was specifically in Lampasas County.
Hey, Brian and everybody, this is Lori Hazel with the Texas Forest Service. I want to build off of kind of the discussion we've had here on BMPs and streamside management zones for using the forest management terminology. Basically, the 50-foot minimum recommendation that Texas uses comes from extensive research in the timber harvesting industry, and it is a minimum recommended, and it's based on soils, existing erosion, existing conditions of your riparian edge. But definitely everything Ryan, Ricky, and Mac have added are all applicable. So there's no one size fits all. It really is site condition situated. And Brian, on your question about limiting ash, juniper, and mesquite in your riparian areas, the key there is, while they're not necessarily a truly desired species for most people, they do provide a form and function in root mass and slowing down water energy coming through the riparian area through rainfall. So when I work with landowners in the Lampasas County area, my recommendation is always start small, get the desired species for that area well established in all age groups. Maybe not regeneration size or seedling size, but definitely protect and enhance your small tree, large tree populations of the desired species as you work on slowly removing the ash, juniper, or mesquite in your riparian area. If that's all you've got in your riparian area, believe it or not, you're actually better off leaving a large percentage of it and reducing it slowly over time, maybe 25% of the tree count at a time, while you reestablish the more desired species, including grasses and forbs, into the riparian area. Anybody else want to add to that?
Sure, I can build off that just very, very quickly. That we've given some resources that show you how tolerant of dry conditions or wet conditions certain plants are, and those would fall kind of into the drier side of the things. They might be facultative or facultative upland plants existing alongside your riparian area is an indication that there might not be as much of a groundwater table there. So to the extent that you can employ management practices that would help build soil health and retain a little bit more soil moisture, you will enhance the ability to have a more diverse plant community along those streamside zones. And as you are slowly, gradually reducing that more monoculture cover in a way that Lori suggested, I typically recommend to landowners that you keep some of that that brushy material that you felled, and lay it on contour, on perpendicular to the flow of water as it comes across the land. So laying it across the hillside in a way that will slow overland flow and reduce erosion, but also maybe allow some surface flow to infiltrate into that riparian zone.
One of the trees, ash juniper, can be killed by just cutting it off with a chainsaw below the lowest green branch. And if you're going to be thinning it out, if it's near the bank of the creek, that'd be my suggestion, with a chainsaw rather than with a grubber. You don't want to loosen up the banks any more than you have to. So keep the heavy equipment away from the banks and just cut that ash off. If it's a mesquite that you want to thin out, like Lori said, the littler mesquites are easier to control. You can cut stump and chemically spray the stump that would be a good control down, even though you're putting chemicals in a riparian area, they're safe chemicals and they do go away after a while. But you need diversity of plants that are, as Ryan said, you want to go toward the wetter side, the facultative wet plants. And I don't think those of you in that watershed in East Texas are going to have that problem. You've got a lot of wetland plants, but in Lampasas, it's a little harder to get wetland plants. So you have to work with what you have. But make small changes. That old saying about measure twice and cut once, it always applies to land management. You can always take more out later, but it's hard to put it back.
Thanks. And Ricky, while you kind of started talking about facultative wetland plants, and do you want to maybe kind of touch on some of those key points from the NRCS riparian vegetation, talking about some of those stability ratings and colonizers and stabilizers, obligate, some of those key
Okay.
points?
Hopefully everyone has seen that publication that's got the 3 columns, sedges, forbs, woody plants, what Claire is talking about. And it's very important to understand the way that page is laid out. If you look at the page, the wettest plants are at the top. And in the bottom of that page, right in the middle column, it explains how wet those plants are. So obligate plants, 99% of the time, they're going to be in a wetland with their roots wet. Facultative wet, 67 and 99% of the time, they'll be in a wetland. But up to a third of the time, you might see them up on the uplands. And then facultative plants are the ones that can take the dryness and they can take the wetness. So they can adapt to short droughts and you won't lose those plants. So it's very desirable to have quite a few facultative plants. But I don't want to say the least desirable, but the lesser of importance to a riparian area are the drier plants, the facultative upland. 67 and 99% of the time, they will be in an upland, and only up to a third of the time down in a riparian area or a wetland. And then the upland plants, 99% of the time, they will be in an upland, and only 1% of the time in a wetland. But as it is, juniper is listed as an upland and mesquite as a facultative upland. So they do show up down in these riparian areas, maybe more than we want, maybe more than that percentage suggests. But the stability rating is another very important thing. We try to find the plants that will score the highest and manage for those plants. If you look on the grass and sedges side, emery sedge, sawgrass, southern wild rice, cattail, bulrushes, most of the bulrushes, not all of them, and then switchgrass are very strong. Eastern gamma grass, very strong plants. They all score a 9 individually. A few of them may be available commercially. The emery sedge and some of the bulrushes you'll have to buy from a wetland grower. They won't be available just everywhere. But if you want seed of a couple of these plants, the switchgrass and the eastern gamma grass seed can be purchased from any seed dealer. Douglas King Seed in San Antonio, Turner Seed in Breckenridge, Texas, Bammert Seed in Muleshoe, Texas. They can sell you the seed. And if you got an area of moist mud that's not a vertical slope, because these plants won't grow on a vertical slope, but if you got a slope of 45 degrees or flatter, you can throw out the seed of either and both switchgrass or eastern gamma, and they will help get that started, the recovery started. You've got to, a lot of people get impatient and they don't want to wait and let nature take over and fix it, but it does no harm to throw out a little bit of that switchgrass or gamma grass seed. And if it gets rooted and produces seed, then it's going to get washed down and it'll fill in another area. And if everyone riparian area did that, it would certainly lead to a little quicker recovery, just because we can get a grass that's 4 to 5 feet tall growing and holding down as much of that new sediment that washes in as possible. So study on that plant. I know there's a lot of plants on that list that you may not be familiar with, but you can look them up on the internet, easy to find what they look like. And one of the main things a person being a student of the land is you need to learn some of these plants. You got to know what the plants are out there. And once you learn the plants, you can look on this list and it will tell you whether they're there in the wet areas where they're supposed to be, or if they are upland plants that are encroaching down into your riparian area. So study your plants, learn the plants, and you'll be a better land manager.
And I just want to remind everyone, so the plant list that Ricky's referring to, when you take the online course for his module 3, Riparian Vegetation, included in that, there's a little box at the top for downloads, and there's a link to those plant lists that he's referring to. And there's several different versions of it, depending on what region of Texas you are located in. So no matter where you are, there should be a north, central, an east, west, south, central. So you'd be able to find the one for your area and be able to look at those plant types and stability ratings. So people you can still feel free to write a question in the chat or unmute, but I'll keep going down kind of through the instructors in between. So Mac and Lori, I know we've already kind of started touching on stream management zones and some of those forestry best management practices, but there's some other topics from the presentation y'all would like to review here quickly. I know you also talked a lot about some best management practices as well in that presentation.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So I guess the main takeaway from our presentation, for those who viewed it, is that forests do provide the cleanest water of any land use, and that's both through the interception rate of the trees, but also the high rate of infiltration. So that water getting slowed down, reducing peak flows, reducing surface runoff, and allowing more of your base and subsurface flow to flow into the streams. And then we go obviously through all the best management practices and benefits of trees in riparian areas. But one part that we maybe wouldn't talk about as much in here is what goes on in urban areas and the importance of these best management practices. And so I can talk a little bit about kind of the importance of low impact development and green infrastructure in these areas. So we pull up the presentation here, make sure I'm talking about the same one. The biggest deal in the urban areas is that we have kind of increased impervious surfaces and these stormwater infrastructure of like sewage pipes. And so in a big heavy rain event, you'll get a lot of water running and speeding up over your impervious surfaces and then enter into your storm drain much faster, and that will take through the storm drain unfiltered directly into your streams. And so it's important that we still have these kind of vegetative and riparian functions and are giving water places to filter in our rural and urban areas. And so I think that's an important takeaway that we should talk about in this as well.
Great, thank you. And then Josh, do you want to touch on, I guess, some of the main management strategies that are available for managing wild pigs in Texas, and which ones you think might be the most successful?
Yeah, sure. Let But Claire, do you mind if I share my screen one more time?
Oh, yeah, no problem. You should still have access. So let me just
Okay.
stop share.
Okay. So first thing I want to do is apologize to Emily and everybody else. I was just trying to share a link there and kind of got put on the spot, and it turns out that I was completely wrong. And if it'll let me here, so I didn't read, but the graph that I showed you guys was rates of correct classification, okay? And it was not actual BST occurrence of wild pigs or anything else. So one of the things with bacterial source tracking is that it is very difficult to classify. It is difficult to determine accurately, and in many cases is not admitted for resource or for research if you can't get the high level of RCC. And this was a level of RCC. This was not occurrence in the watershed. And so Emily went ahead and sent the actual occurrence of the watershed. And if it'll let me do it without all these things popping up, I will continue to eat crow here, because it turns out in this particular watershed that non-avian wildlife, including wild pigs, has the highest rate of occurrence for actual E. coli BST results or bacterial source tracking results. So anyway, just want to apologize and then also point that out. So that's one of the downsides of these Zoom type deals, is a lot of times you're just quickly coming up with stuff. But wild pigs are in fact the leading contributor, at least were in 2014. And so let's translate that into wild pig control and management. What that means is that wild pig management and control is just as important in this particular watershed as anywhere else. And they've proven in numerous watersheds that just by removing wild pigs and reducing populations significantly, you can potentially declassify that watershed for bacterial impairment. Now, the majority of watersheds in Texas are classified as bacterially impaired, including this one. And so there's a ton of work to do in that regard. Now, I saw earlier too about how eradication is nearly impossible, and it really kind of can be, quite frankly. Wild pigs are well established on the landscape. They are very, very difficult to control. But what's really important to remember is that a lot of times the name of the game is not necessarily population reduction. A lot of times the name of the game is damage reduction. And we have tools that are geared more towards directing animal movements and reducing damages. And then we have tools that are geared more towards population reduction. And according to the research anyhow, we have two tools that are research proven to be independently capable of reducing populations. And those two tools are trapping and aerial gunning. Research conducted a number of years ago found that 66% of the population, or approximately 2 out of every 3 wild pigs on the landscape, need to be removed just to keep the populations constant. So they've come down on the population estimates in Texas considerably. They now say we have at least 2 million wild pigs. But in order to actually reduce populations, we need to eclipse that threshold of 66%. And the primary way that we accomplish this is through trapping, large-scale trapping at the sounder level, or reducing large number of pigs or removing large numbers of pigs at one time, or through aerial gunning regiments. And you can get with your county extension agent there and see if you can get on Texas Wildlife Services flight lists and that sort of thing. But if we're serious about reducing populations as much as we can, because a lot of times it's very, very difficult, and reducing damages, we do need to try to get on the trapping and the aerial gunning as much as possible. The other tools that we have, the snaring, the shooting, and the use of to train dogs, at least according to the research, are more aptly directed as tools of pressure, ways to direct animal movements and reduce damages. We like to talk a lot about shooting and hunting because this is Texas, right? Most people think, oh, they come out and they shoot, one pig out of 20 and they're doing some good. Well, they are, but maybe not in the way that they think, right? Because pigs are very easily educated. And research on this affirms that we can use this as a tool to reduce damages. Now, you only killed one out of those 20 pigs, but the 19 of them that were also there just got educated to human presence. They now want to abandon that area where they've been causing damage. And if you're protecting your ag fields or your crops or your backyard or a golf course or something like that, or even your watershed, that's one of the ways that we can look at that tool. But I don't want to discourage people, from wild pig management, because it's very, very important to do all that we can and to reduce the numbers as much as we can, but more importantly, to reduce the damages as much as we can, because as we've learned, if we do this enough, we can potentially declassify some of these bacterial impairments and reduce a lot of these damages in the watershed, even if we can't reduce the populations to the scale that we want to, because they are so well established on the landscape. I will close with this, if it'll let me. We've been doing some research here ever since this COVID stuff started. And we figured out what actually happened in February, in March, and in April. No, I'm just kidding, guys. I just wanted to show that picture and really just remind everybody there are tons and tons of reasons that we need to control wild pigs. Their bacterial contributions are as much as 4 times greater than that of a white-tailed deer, particularly in these riparian areas and surface water systems. Ag damages, they just came out with a new thing that ag damages have eclipsed $100 million in the state of Texas. Let's see if I can share this one real quick. So these are the new figures that have come out according to the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Department of Agricultural Economics. Losses to grain crops alone exceeding $89 million annually. Losses to livestock exceeding $40 million. Excuse me. Total ag damages now are in excess of $100 million annually, into the billions nationwide. And you recall in Texas in 2012, we've been using that $52 million estimate, which a lot of us have known have been a vast underestimate for many, many years. And it's good to see a much more accurate. And this, to be honest, this is probably underestimated as well, because a lot of wild pig damages are hard to quantify. And then I did mention this briefly, but we still have at least 2 million on the landscape, which means that we potentially have more here than anywhere else.
Yay. Yeah, I've asked for this part to be brought down.
So, using our tools, guys, using our tools, understanding which ones are for population reduction, independently capable, understanding which ones are better directed as tools of pressure, but also knowing that utilizing that combined approach of all of the tools in our toolbox is how we're going to be able to achieve the most good in our abatement efforts. And if I can bring this up again here. Come on. Claire, I may need you to take control from me because it's not letting me do it. But that's it for me, guys, in case there's any other questions.
Stop your sharing and I'll pull back up my screen. I haven't seen any other questions, so I guess the only other thing I wanted to briefly touch on, I know we've talked about some management strategies and best management practices, and I just wanted to reiterate, it's not a one size fits all for every landowner or every area. So when we spoke about in some of those presentations, those local resources, those are the people that would be good to reach out to. The Natural Resource Conservation Service can come out to your property and help talk to you about what your goals are and what might be good strategies. The Texas A&M Forest Service can also come out, as well as there's wildlife biologists with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. So, and those are, they have regional folks that are around the state. So if you go onto their websites and in the course, you'll see the links on where you can go to look up who's local in your area, or you can reach out to any of our instructors, and I'm sure they would be happy to help get you in contact with someone who's local to your area to help you with what your goals are and how you can best improve your land stewardship, and which all would then lead to that good water stewardship, seeing that improvement in water quality and a more healthy riparian area. So I just wanted to mention that again.
Claire, might I have one more comment? Here's something, if you're not sure how much good you can do with controlling grazing down in the riparian area, and I'm all for grazing, and over in the southeastern part of the state, timber production is very important. You know, we need that. But if you want to, if you're thinking that cattle and deer might be having an impact on the vegetation in your riparian area, drag down a couple of those 16-foot long cattle panels, bend them into a circle, take about 4 T-posts, drive them in the ground. And so you're going to have a circle made out of 2 16-foot cattle panels. Put that around an area where there might be a few little shrubs, but you can't tell what they are because they're so short. And within 2 growing seasons, you'll be able to tell how much vegetation is inside of that cage. That's the potential of your riparian area. And then on the outside, you can see how much of it is being utilized by livestock, wildlife. And it might open your eyes to just, you know, you've got the plants that can grow, but day in and day out under grazing, they're being hammered. You know, cattle are no different than humans. There's good water down in the riparian area, there's shade, and oftentimes there's good vegetation to eat. So they spend a disproportionate amount of time in those riparian areas. Fencing will help control that. Rotational grazing helps to control it. But think about putting an exclosure cage down there and just see how much vegetation you can grow. Here's another idea. Take a photo the day you put it in, and then about every 6 months, or maybe in the spring of the growing season, May, June, then late summer, October, take another photo. And then you'll be able to, over time, over a couple of years, just see how much that stuff is growing. No one planted it. It's just, it was there and it was being suppressed by the browsing animals. So take that as a challenge.
All right.
I don't think that was a question. I think that might have been someone was accidentally unmuted. But does anyone else have any final lingering thoughts? If not, then I have just one final slide, but I'll wait a second. So if not, I just want to remind y'all that this was recorded and we're going to be sending it out following the meeting. So y'all can revisit some of this discussion, or if you want to look back up on an instructor's email address, that these slides and everything will be made available to you. For those of you who took the course and are looking to count them for continuing education units, I just want to remind you to make sure that after you finish the course to download that certificate, as well as saving the agenda for the online course. You need to keep the 2 of those to count for your CEUs. For those of the CEUs, TDA pesticide, Society of American Foresters, and certified crop advisors that need license numbers, you make sure you have that added in, and we'll also on our end, we'll make sure that we're submitting your information as well, so that you're getting counted for those CEUs. And then just as I said before, so you'll still have access to this course after this online course. so you can rewatch it or finish watching it if you still have to go through a couple. And if you have any questions as you go through it, so please make sure to reach out to me or any of the other instructors, and we'd be happy to help. I'll get all of these links and everything compiled that's been shared in the chat and send that out hopefully later today or tomorrow. So look for that, and we appreciate y'all joining in and kind of diving into this online format with us. We really appreciate it.